Sonic Frontiers obviously was a step in the right direction, and obviously had a bigger budget than a game like Sonic Forces. And as much as we enjoyed Sonic Frontiers, or didn't enjoy I guess, it did have a lack of polish in a lot of areas in the game, especially with animations and just overall quality of life features were not really there, and honestly still aren't here yet. But there has been a lot of Sonic news going around saying that Sonic Frontiers only had 60 people working on a game based off of an interview with Kishimoto. But it seems there's a little bit of misinformation here, so we're gonna talk about this. But before we do get into it,
hey, 70% of you aren't subscribed, and 40,000 of you keep coming back to these videos. So why not hit the subscribe button? It severely helps the channel.
So we're going to take a look at this article in question where it talks about the 60 people thing. According to Kishimoto, the team carried a lot of lessons from Sonic Forces and other previous 3D Sonic games into Sonic Frontiers. Development on Sonic Frontiers began in 2017 at Tokyo with a team consisting of 60 people. And then it says recently Sonic Team's development scale seems to be quite large. But how many people do you have? There are about 400 people in the Japanese Sonic team belonging to Azuka Division 2. 400 people, that's about twice as light as it used to be. Azuka, of course, not all of them of the second division are making Sonic. There's also an arcade development team that is doing Puyo Puyo. Okay, so this has people going kind of wild and thinking that no, they barely had anybody working on Frontiers. That's honestly not true. And let me say one thing before we get into the thing that kind of debunks part of this. Sonic Team is just a name of a development team. Same as CD Projekt Red, Rockstar, or whatever. They're the ones that just make the games. They're just a development team. And two, Sonic Team has always made more than Sonic, even going back to the Dreamcast era and even before that. Sonic Team created Phantasy Star for one. And Phantasy Star New Genesis just came out about 2 years ago now, I believe. And yes, Sonic Team makes that game and they work on that game actively, so that's also Sonic Team. Phantasy Star New Genesis is an MMO, so that requires a lot of people to look over that game. So that's also a big deal. And like Azuka said, there's Puyo Puyo. That also does require more team members to work on Puyo Puyo. And the next thing is that Sonic Team also makes multiple Sonic games at once, at least as far as we know. As Kishimoto said, there's a 2D games in the works, so that means there's separate teams within Sonic Team that make different games. And also, to be honest here, you don't need 400 people to make one game, because then that causes a budget problem as well, because you have to pay all 400 of those people for the game, so you have to balance it out. Honestly, 100 and something people is enough people to make a game. Even 40. One of my favorite games of all time, which is a massive game, really big game. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 had about 40 or 60 people that made the game, and it's pretty peak. There's a lot of economics that go into making games, and it's not as simple as people just like to put out there. It requires so much macro and microeconomic knowledge just to run a company and make things work. So, basically what I'm saying, even if this was entirely true, it does not matter that much if it was actually the case. Yes, more people working on the game could be potentially better, but it doesn't necessarily mean it'll be better. Sometimes overlap can happen with developers where there's too many people working on too many things. Think about when some of you probably have had group projects in school. There's probably too many people sometimes and not enough stuff to do. The number of people should reflect the toll of the game needed. And Sonic Frontiers wasn't necessarily AAA. I'd say it was almost there, but not fully. So it didn't really require a huge AAA team. So, the thing that we have that kind of debunks the 60 members thing. We have a tweet thread from All Shark Queen, shout out to them, and they said this. Okay, so I wanted to come on here and say something about Sonic Team's manpower and development count. I've seen a lot of people spread misinformation about this and wanted to make it clear. First things first, Sonic Team only developed Sonic Frontiers with 60 people. This is a claim that is purely false. First of all, Sonic Team had 27 gameplay directors working on this title. 27 is a lot of people. And then they go on to say, alone, the game had 44 programmers as a whole, double the amount of Unleashed. This is even more so true with the art department having more than 80 people alone in that department. Comparing this with Forces is honestly shocking. Look at the number of character animators too. We are comparing 2 to 12, which is a big jump. And let's not even talk about the cutscene artists. We went from 6 to 13. The only part that seems remotely the same is the number of level designers, which technically has doubled, and guess what? None of that are even the same people. So it is apparent that Sonic Team has twice as many people working on their games than the last one. So why did Sonic Frontiers end up as unpolished as it did? Because of the fact that it was in development hell, which took up most of their budget and time, which is why all their assets are reused and borrowed as well. You can tell from the beta footage that they only started adding parkour and level design elements late into the game's production. This is why they don't match the terrain or change in theming. And considering that prototyping and experimenting take the least amount of people to do during this stage, they only had up to a year and a half to actually make the game, and that's when most of the team jumped on to make the rest of the game. For more proof, here you go, an interview that Azuka just did that states that the number of people working on Sonic Team doubled. And it's basically the same Azuka thing we saw earlier talking about 400 people. So yeah, Sonic Team does not have, or well, no longer has 60 people working on their game. It's more so 130 now. Still not a lot compared to other franchises, but not 60. And Sega is continuing to hire more people for the developer. And yeah, the rest of it is just more so their opinions on it. And I'll have to say, 130 people is actually still quite a lot for a game. So 130 people worked on Sonic Frontiers, but it seemed like it had 60 at the start, the very beginning, coming off of Forces, because they didn't have as many people with Forces, so they're in the process of hiring and gathering a bigger team in order to continue further with creating Sonic Frontiers the way it is now. So Sonic Frontiers was worked on by 130 people or so. So what I think what happened here is in that interview, that quote got taken as face value, as they were saying that only 60 people made Sonic Frontiers. But when they said in that quote, 2017 Tokyo started with 60 people, that's what they were really trying to say. They started the game with 60 people. And then now it has since doubled to 400 people. Or not doubled, more than doubled I should say. This has been a very strange time of misinformation, I guess, being out there. Because all you have to do to get this information is beat Sonic Frontiers and watch the credits scroll. That's all you really have to do to figure this out. I don't know. I find all of this very interesting, and it needs to be out there so that way people aren't clowning on Sonic Team for no reason this time. And that way you guys know this is kind of misinformation, and the truth is about 130 people worked on Frontiers. And now that there's 400 members working at Sonic Team, and obviously, like I said, there's people working on Phantasy Star and Puyo Puyo and whatever else Sonic Team decides to do, there's more people now to work on Sonic. So maybe the next Sonic game could have about 200 people working on the next game. And like I said, we also have this 2D game that's being worked on, probably by a different section of Sonic Team. So there's more people for that kind of stuff as well. 400 is nothing to scoff at. That's about as big as Monolith Soft, who works on Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and the Xenoblade games. Sonic is seemingly going to have a bigger budget going forward, as there's more people, so they have to pay more people to do more work. So that requires a bigger budget unless they just don't use that many people, but 130 people is still quite a lot. It's nothing to scoff at. So I just wanted to put this out there so that way people have more correct information, and that way people aren't spreading misinformation as much and getting upset for no reason. But yeah, that's it for this video. If you guys like the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss more content like this. It's really important that you don't miss this stuff, because it can just disappear if you don't hit the subscribe button. But anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one.
Well, whatever happens, happens.